It was a packed schedule in Europe for President Moon Jae-in last week. That took him to Paris, Rome, the Vatican, Brussels and Copenhagen. He met with several European and world leaders, including the Pope, who threw his full weight behind President Moon's efforts to achieve peace on the Korean peninsula. But while European leaders agreed on the need for the complete denuclearization of North Korea, President Moon's calls to consider easing sanctions were not received as well as he might have hoped. To further discuss this, we have today with us Shin Se-min, our chief Blue House correspondent, who was travelling with the president throughout last week. And we also have with us Dr. Bong Young-shik from the Yonsei Institute for North Korean Studies for further insights as well. It's great to have you both with us here today.
It's a pleasure.
Now let me turn to you first, Se-min. It was a busy week, as I said, for President Moon last week. 5 countries, including the Vatican, meeting over half a dozen heads of state, all in 9 days. But let's start with what went well, and perhaps the highlight of this visit, which was President Moon's visit to the Vatican. I mean, you were there, Se-min. Can you tell us about what it was like and how President Moon was received?
Right. In fact, it was deemed the climax of the president's marathon tour, a 5-nation trip to Europe. Based on what we were told during and after the president's schedule from the Vatican, it seemed as though the Holy See have made a lot of exceptions for the president's visit during that busy time of synod or the meeting of the bishops from around the world. There was that special mass for peace during his trip, which was also held during that busy weeks of the Vatican, which was also presided by the Pope's top diplomat, Cardinal Secretary of State Pietro Parolin. And from the world of Catholic Church, they say it is extremely rare for a foreign country or an individual state to give speech at the Vatican. And the fact that they've squeezed President Moon's schedule into their own busy weeks already signifies that they've been putting a lot of weight into his visit, perhaps even valuing his trip there.
Dr. Bong, Pope Francis gave his full support to President Moon's his efforts towards achieving peace on the Korean peninsula. What do you think it means for President Moon to have this kind of figure backing what's his mission, should we say?
Well, I don't think the Holy See is completely endorsing everything that President Moon Jae-in is pursuing in terms of improving the chance of complete denuclearization of North Korea by easing existing economic sanctions. The Holy Father only confirmed his wish that there will be peace and the improvement of human rights situations on the Korean peninsula, but his position cannot be interpreted as a full acceptance of his readiness to make an official visit to Pyongyang, as reported by the President's office, the Blue House. So in that regard, the Moon Jae-in government is rather desperate to make anything positive out of this clearly very disappointing trip to European continent.
Before we get to those disappointing details, so President Moon relayed a message from Kim Jong-un to the Pope, which was to invite him to North Korea. So as the Dr. Bong was saying, so the Pope expressed his willingness to do so, but he stopped short of accepting completely. He said he will wait for a formal invitation and then he will see from there. But from everything you saw and the atmosphere you felt there, were there any signs to suggest that he really would go to North Korea at some point?
Right, given how the Vatican was flexible in working their own schedule to host President Moon to their Vatican, may trick us into thinking that the Vatican is in fact being also positive for President Moon. But we also have to remember, as Dr. Bong had said, the Pope has yet to give a clear answer to whether or not he will actually visit North Korea in response to the invitation that was relayed by President Moon Jae-in. Of course, all of the hostings and the events that were put for President Moon himself was also amicable and positive. But as to when it comes to dealing with North Korea-related issue, I think we also have to be cautious when it comes to that. And a senior Vatican official also did say after the meeting with President Moon Jae-in and between President Moon and Pope Francis that the Pope will seriously consider making an unprecedented visit to the regime, which is still not an answer of whether it's yes or no, and added that conditions would have to be made before invitation from Kim gets accepted. So that's still an unanswered question that we still have to wait for.
Right. According to the the statements issued by the Cardinal Secretary of State, Pietro Parolin, then reported in the Vatican News on October 19th. And in response to the question whether the Holy See was getting into preparation for this visit by the Holy Father, he said, no, we have to wait a little now in order to formalize this thing. We only gave the verbal expression of interest as a first step. And there should be a lot of certain conditions that have to be made in order for the Holy Father to actually make the trip to Pyongyang. And the Holy See is very mindful of the Holy See possibly being manipulated by the propaganda of North Korea, as the case of the Billy Graham, the pastor of the United States, who made 2 visits to North Korea in 1992 and 1994, as a saying that North Korea does not need God or the Bible because they already have the great leader Kim Il-sung. Although Billy Graham and his people in the church deny that interpretation by the North Korea, but that suggests the caution to the Holy See to very carefully consider this possibility.
But there's also something that we can look forward to, because Pope did say that, and the Vatican also confirmed that he has plans to visit Japan and Asia next year. So opening up a possibility that there may be another extension of his trip to Asia. And we can't, disregard the fact that Pontiff is fond of carrying out peace during his entire life, a career as the head of the Roman Catholic Church. And I mean, although he's coming from the religious circle, he also has taken part in meddling or interfering with some of the international affairs like the Cuba and the U.S. So I think we still have to keep our hopes high, although some of the things that we've been seeing from last week isn't all that positive just yet.
Yes, of course. This Pope is a little bit unconventional, to say the least, compared to the previous popes. So we'll have to see whether this yes or no does become a yes or a no in the future. Let's move on to the rest of President Moon's schedule from last week. So he met with, as I said, several European leaders, including the heads of several United Nations Security Council members, including France and Britain. So North Korea was one of the main talking points, as we can expect. What were President Moon's aims for this trip when he met with these leaders, do you think? And do you think he achieved them at all?
If you look at President Moon's 5-nation tour, it started from France, one of the permanent member nations of the United Security Council, meaning that by having President Macron's support on North Korea-related issue, he perhaps wanted to have a smooth process in bringing the European leaders on board to his peace drive. And meeting, like you said, with European leaders, with the UK, the France, 2 of the permanent members of the UN Security Council, he had hoped to bring and convey the idea of the international body start considering the lifting of the international sanctions on North Korea, saying it will facilitate the regime's denuclearization. But as we've spoken in the past couple of minutes, the response we've seen wasn't that warm. Those European nations reaffirmed their stance that North Korea should proceed and show more concrete actions as to the CVID, complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization, the term that we have not been seeing over the past couple of weeks in between the U.S. and North Korea. So, and that acronym was also included in that joint statement of the Asia-Europe meeting, or the ASEM.
So this emphasis on CVID, Dr. Bong, probably not what President Moon would have hoped for at the beginning of this trip. So do you think this trip was a bit of a failure?
Well, it's a failure in terms of President Moon Jae-in failing to listen to the answers from the heads of the state and the leaders gathered at the ASEM meeting, that easing sanction would make a positive effect on the North Korean leadership to move in the direction of complete denuclearization. But it is not a total failure in terms of the South Korean president clearly understanding where the international community, not just the United States, is standing in terms of North Korea's denuclearization. North Korean government once criticized the U.S. government for its quote-unquote gangster-like behavior without keeping its own end of the promises made in the Singapore summit meeting, and the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo answered that if the United States is a gangster, then the entire world is gangsters, because the UN Security Council resolutions that impose economic sanctions on North Korea were all passed unanimously in the United Nations Security Council. So the lesson that South Korean government learned from this trip is that South Korea needs to persuade not just the United States, but also the entire global community if it is going to make the case that easing economic sanctions, not just the United Nations Security Council resolutions, but domestic economic sanctions by South Korean government would require international support, and which will not be easy.
I described it perhaps as a failure, but could it not be described as well also as maybe it was a calculated risk, a calculated play by President Moon to not necessarily send a message to these world leaders, but actually to North Korea?
Right, I thought about that, and I had a short conversation with you on this point, that that is why I believe that all were not lost in President Moon's trip to Europe, because this was a very good opportunity for South Korean government to actually tell the North Korean leadership that, listen, we have done everything we could as a mediator and the driver of the the Korean Peninsula affairs, but as clearly demonstrated that there is a very concrete, unwavering international consensus that complete and verifiable denuclearization of North Korea is an absolute condition. And before North Korea is going to take another concrete and verifiable steps for denuclearization, that economic sanctions would remain in place, and the choice is yours. So in that regard, that this trip is not a total failure.
So a mixed bag, to say. So, but then let me turn to you, Se-min. So President Moon Jae-in perhaps did not get everything that he might have wanted, but what happens next now? Where does President Moon go next? What does he have to do from now on?
I think just as Dr. Bong had said, there is little room the South Korean leader can play at this moment as it waits for another summit between North Korean leader and U.S. President Donald Trump. And it looks like he will be playing that role of being a mediator on the world global stage. So every chance he gets with the world leaders or a summit of its kind, he will use that opportunity to relay the message from North Korea, as he's the one who's been speaking with North Korean leader just 3 times already this year, and as well as his goal of a peace drive. So, and that will also be at the APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting happening next month, as well as the G20 summit in the latter part of next month in Argentina. So we'll be seeing President Moon doing a similar sort of a broker role, playing that broker role on the international stage in terms of North Korea.
But before that, I'm assuming that there needs to be movement towards some sort of progress between North Korea and the US, Dr. Bong. Where do you think that is going to go now from here?
Well, Secretary of the State Mike Pompeo, in his interview with the Voice of America, that he was really hopeful to have a high-level meeting with North Korean official in about 10 days. I think this is kind of an issuance of ultimatum or warning to North Korean government because of the expected meeting between special representative for North Korea, Mr. Stephen Biegun, with his North Korean counterpart in Vienna failed to take place. So I believe that the United States government is basically relaying the message to Pyongyang that you can play the delaying tactic as long as you want, but your economy will keep bleeding. And we have no intention to rush our schedule, as reiterated by the statement by President Donald Trump himself, that we are not going to rush. We can wait. The remains of the fallen soldiers of the United States have come back to home. And there has not been any missile or nuclear test by North Korea. So we are fine with things as they are. So it should be North Korean leadership that has to make actions if they want to see any benefits out of the Singapore summit meeting. So I guess the United States is ready to play a very long-term game with North Korea at this point. And the second summit meeting between President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un seems to have been postponed to early January already. So the message from Washington to Pyongyang is that, and message to Seoul as well, that the United States will never hand over the initiative to control the pace and schedule and the terms of negotiation on the issue of denuclearization to any other country.
Well, we'll have to see. You're saying next January? We'll have to see whether it happens before the end of the year or a bit later than that as well. Anyway, I'd like to thank you both for coming in today. We've just run out of time. So, Dr. Bong and Se-min, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.